Hello there, and welcome to Infinite Earth Stories, where curiosity gets cozy, and the restless planet we live on becomes the perfect bedtime story. Tonight, instead of tracing ancient time through stone and crystal, we're going to imagine forward, into an Earth that never was, and likely never will be. A dreamlike experiment in thought. A question whispered at the edge of physics and imagination. What if Earth stopped spinning? Not for a second, not for a pause, but forever. No sunrise, no sunset, no gentle turning of the globe beneath your feet. A planet, still alive, still breathing volcanoes and oceans, yet utterly still in its rotation. It sounds impossible, and in many ways, it is. But it's by daring to imagine the impossible that we uncover just how extraordinary the possible really is. So settle in. Let your thoughts loosen. Breathe slowly. Because we are about to still the world and drift into the silence of a planet without spin. Every moment of your life has been carried quietly by a rhythm you cannot feel. You don't hear it like a drum. You don't see it like a tide. And yet, Earth's rotation, its endless spin, is the hidden metronome of existence. Earth completes one turn on its axis every 23 hours and 56 minutes. For us, that's a day. But for the universe, it is rotation, a constant pirouette that began the moment our world was born. That spin is what gives us day and night. Without it, there would be no sunrise to chase the stars, no dusk to dim the light. Just one face, scorched by eternal day, and another drowned in endless night. It shapes the winds. As Earth turns, air is tugged sideways by the Coriolis effect, twisting storms into spirals, steering jet streams, sculpting climates. It guides the oceans. The moon pulls at the seas, yes, but Earth's rotation tells them how to move, when to rise, when to fall. Without it, the tides would be strange, swollen, unpredictable. It even gives us balance. Like a dancer spinning to stay upright, Earth's rotation steadies its tilt. That tilt gives us seasons, diversity of climates, the ebb and flow of ecosystems. The spin whispers in everything. In the monsoon rains, in the swirling hurricanes, in the gentle rhythm of dusk and dawn. It is so constant, so ordinary, that we forget it is there. And yet without it, the Earth as we know it could not exist. Now, imagine it slowing. The dancer loses her step. The spinning globe begins to drag. Not in hours, not in days, but over an eternity of slowing, until at last it holds still in space. The continents no longer sweep under the stars. The oceans no longer chase the moon. The air no longer spirals with invisible hands. Stillness. For the first time in 4.5 billion years, the planet has lost its rhythm. What would it feel like? What would you see if you stood on its surface? If you were on the side facing the sun, the light would never leave. Days would never end. Shadows would stretch and shrink, but never dissolve into night. The sky, pale and clouded, might shimmer with heat until it cracked with storms. If you were on the far side, the sun would never return. Darkness would be unbroken, except for the faint glow of stars and a frozen moon. Cold would settle like glass over oceans, forests, and cities, turning them into silent statues. And between those two extremes, day without end, night without reprieve, there would be a twilight band, a narrow strip of the planet caught forever in a kind of dusk. The place where survival might still be possible. But there is more than light and shadow. When Earth stops, the atmosphere does not stop with it. The air, moving at hundreds of meters per second at the equator, would surge forward, racing across continents, stripping forests, flattening mountains of glass and steel. The oceans, too, would surge, flung from their basins by momentum, racing eastward in tsunamis that no coast could endure. It would be chaos, yes, but chaos only at the beginning, because in time, momentum would die down, the winds would slow, the waters would settle, and then a new balance would emerge. It would not be the balance we know, not the quiet spin of dusk into dawn, but something stranger, something alien, a world divided forever into light and dark. And here, I want you to pause too, to feel that stillness. Imagine standing there at the edge of the twilight zone, where the sun forever hangs low on the horizon. The ground beneath your feet no longer moves. The stars above you are pinned, unmoving. The world has fallen silent. How strange. How impossible. And yet, how beautiful too. The Earth's spin is something we cannot touch, yet it touches everything. To appreciate what its loss would mean, we must first notice what it quietly gives. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine what it feels like when morning arrives. The slow brightening of the sky, the fading of stars, the warmth spreading across your skin. It is so ordinary, so expected, that we forget how extraordinary it is. Every morning is born from rotation. The sun does not rise. The earth turns. We live on a planet that carries us gently into and out of light each day, like a cradle rocked by a parent's hand. Night, too, is a gift of spin. Darkness to rest in, cycles for animals to hunt by, shadows for dreams to unfold. The balance of day and night is a balance of turning. Without spin, one side of the world would never sleep beneath starlight again. The other would never wake to a dawn. Half the planet would be trapped in a never-ending morning. Half would be locked in eternal midnight. Think of how many rhythms depend on that turning. The migration of birds following day and season, the blooming of flowers that open to sunlight, the circadian clocks within every human cell, tuned to dawn and dusk, all of them gently calibrated to rotation. Take that rhythm away, and the world becomes unmoored. Not instantly destroyed, but profoundly different. Now picture the air itself. A breeze against your skin, a storm gathering over the sea, the invisible motion of molecules dancing in sunlight. Earth's spin sculpts that motion. It bends winds into curves, twists storms into spirals, shapes the jet streams that carry weather from continent to continent. The great gyres of the ocean are stirred not just by currents and tides, but by the breath of winds, themselves stirred by rotation. Without spin, the Coriolis effect would vanish. The grand spirals of hurricanes, the swirling cyclones, the great conveyor belts of air, gone. In their place, a new sky would be born. Winds rushing not in circles but in lines, sweeping relentlessly from hot zones to cold, from eternal day to endless night. The sky we know is balanced between chaos and order, sculpted by spin. Remove that, and the atmosphere would reinvent itself. Alien, yet still alive. Stand at a shoreline, and you'll see the tides, rising, falling, pulsing like the breath of the planet. We owe those tides to the moon's pull, but the rhythm, the timing, the resonance that comes from Earth's rotation. As the world turns, the oceans are carried under the moon's gaze, swelling and falling in cycles that have marked time for creatures since the first life swam. Without spin, the tides would still exist, but they would no longer follow the same graceful rhythm. They would surge in strange patterns, tugged and delayed, restless. The great conveyor belts of the ocean, the currents that carry warmth from tropics to poles, that balance climates, that feed ecosystems, are woven together with rotation. Remove it, and the seas would stumble, their circulations collapsing into new forms. In time, new balances might emerge, but they would be unrecognizable to us. Coasts would flood, climates would shift, ecosystems would tremble, all from the loss of that invisible turn. This was only the beginning. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the immediate consequences of a world without spin, the atmosphere reshaping itself, the oceans surging and stumbling, the skies rewriting their own patterns. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, hold this image gently. A planet stilled, a sun frozen on the horizon, a ribbon of twilight where life clings. Feel the weight of stillness, the hush of winds moving in straight lines, the slow creep of oceans adjusting to new shores, the quiet rhythm of a world without rhythm. And as you rest there, remember, the Earth is still spinning. Beneath you, right now, the planet is turning you gently into tomorrow. The sun will rise, the night will come again. The rhythm continues, and in that turning is comfort. In that spin is life. But remember, this is only a thought experiment. Earth will not stop spinning. Physics would not allow it, not in the lifetime of our species, not in the age of our planet. And yet, by imagining it, we see more clearly the gifts of what we already have. We see how extraordinary it is to watch a sunrise, how miraculous it is to feel a breeze shaped by rotation, how precious it is to live with days and nights, each gently leading into the next. To think of Earth without spin is not to predict doom, but to practice wonder, to notice the invisible rhythm we take for granted, to let gratitude soften us. And yet, even in that stillness, the Earth would carry memory, the bulge at the equator, the scars of tides, the whisper of weather patterns. All would tell stories of a planet that once turned. The rocks, the oceans, even the air would remember. Just as zircons remember the first rains of the Hadean, so too would our frozen seas and static skies remember the motion that once was. And we, telling bedtime stories like this, would imagine rotation as if it were a myth. Once, we might say, the sun rose and set. Once, shadows moved. Once, the world turned. The still Earth would be a planet of memory, haunted by motion. But we, as humans, are children of rotation. Our bodies carry circadian rhythms, internal clocks tuned to 24-hour cycles. Without sunrise and sunset, how would we measure time? We might invent artificial days, lights that dim and brighten, alarms that imitate dawn. We might cling to the rhythm of sleep and waking, even if the sky refused to change. But over generations, perhaps we would change too. Our bodies might stretch their rhythms, adapt to weeks of waking and weeks of rest. Our cultures might invent calendars not of days, but of seasons measured by the slow orbit of Earth around the sun. A year would remain. The seasons would remain. But the days, the gentle turning markers of our lives, would vanish. It is a haunting thought. A life without mornings, a life without evenings. Just existence, stretched long and still, measured not by turning but by endurance. If Earth were to stop spinning, the most habitable place would not be in the endless blaze of the day side, nor in the eternal frost of the night side, but in between, in the twilight band. This narrow ribbon, circling the planet like a crown, would be a place of permanent dusk. The sun would hover eternally at the horizon, neither rising nor setting. The light would be soft, amber, almost dreamlike. Here life might cling. Plants might adapt to constant low light, never knowing night, never knowing true noon. Animals might evolve to chase the thin gradients of temperature and shade. Humans, if they endured, would build their cities in this narrow strip, learning to live with a horizon that never moved. Imagine standing in such a city. The sun, forever frozen, painting the sky with endless sunset. Shadows long, but never shifting. The stars dim, but never gone. It would feel like living in a painting. Surreal, static, yet strangely serene. Let's rest here, in this image. Picture yourself standing at the twilight edge. To one side, the sun hovers forever above the horizon. To the other, night spreads endless and star-strewn. The ground beneath your feet does not move. The stars above you are pinned in place. The wind blows not in spirals, but in long sighs between heat and cold. It is strange. It is alien. But it is also beautiful. For just a moment, let that stillness soothe you. So now, with all of this in mind, the days, the nights, the winds, the tides, the balance, let us still it all. Let's imagine Earth paused. The days no longer pass. The winds no longer spiral. The seas no longer dance as they once did. Half the planet is flooded in light, half drowned in dark. Between them, a ribbon of twilight stretching around the globe like a band of dusk. It is not the end of Earth. It is not silence forever. But it is change, vast, unimaginable, breathtaking. And in that thought experiment lies a kind of meditation. A reminder that what feels fixed, a sunrise, a breeze, a tide, is not fixed at all. It is a gift of rotation. Pause the planet, and you pause that gift. You see it clearly. For the first time, spin also gives balance. The Earth is not a perfect sphere, but a bulging one. At the equator, the planet is thicker, fatter, pushed outward by centrifugal force. Without spin, that bulge would slowly collapse. Oceans would creep away from the equator, flooding toward the poles. Land would rise, where water retreats, sink where seas advance. Whole continents would be reshaped, not by tectonics or erosion, but by the quiet release of spin. Even gravity would feel different. At the equator today, centrifugal force slightly reduces your weight. You weigh just a little less standing there than you do at the poles. Without spin, that tiny gift would vanish. You would feel heavier, as though the planet were holding you just a little tighter. And perhaps it would be. A still planet is a more solemn planet, leaning into its gravity, no longer softened by motion. The first and most immediate change would come from the air itself. Right now, the atmosphere spins with the Earth. From the ground, you don't notice it. But at the equator, the surface of the planet is racing eastward at more than 1,600 kilometers per hour. The air moves with it, part of that same motion. If Earth suddenly stopped, the air would not. It would rush forward at unimaginable speeds, racing eastward over the now still surface. A wall of wind, faster than any hurricane, scouring the continents. Forests ripped from roots, mountains shaved bare, oceans thrown from their basins. It would be chaos, for a while. But air, like everything else, seeks balance. The first furious gales would eventually slow. Friction with the ground, drag across oceans, the resistance of mountains, all would bleed energy from the winds. In time, days, weeks, months, the air would calm. The storms would fade. And then a new atmosphere would emerge. But it would not be the atmosphere we know. Today, Winds are sculpted by spin. The Coriolis effect bends them, curves them, weaves them into spirals that give rise to hurricanes, cyclones, jet streams. Remove the spin, and those spirals vanish. Instead, air would move in simple lines, from hot to cold, from day to night. On the eternal day side, the ground would bake beneath relentless sunlight. The air would grow hot, rise in towers, and rush outward. On the eternal night side, the ground would freeze, the air grow heavy, and sink. Between the two, a vast circulation would form, a slow but unstoppable conveyor belt of wind. Up at the day side, down at the night side, sweeping across the twilight band in endless tides of air. The sky would become stranger, less like the restless spirals of Earth today, more like the giant belts of Jupiter. Great flows, east to west, day to night. Clouds would gather differently too. Instead of storms that spin and wander, there would be colossal banks of thundercloud, stacked permanently along the edge of the twilight zone, where hot and cold met in eternal battle. Lightning would lace the sky there, storms flashing forever, never moving, never ending. It would be a world where weather was not fleeting, not a passing system, but a fixed geography. The same storm, the same winds, the same clouds, anchored by physics. A sky alive, but unmoving. On the day side, without rotation to carry heat around the planet, the sun's fire would be relentless. Air would rise, again and again, building towers of convection. Temperatures would soar far beyond what we know today. Deserts expanding into seas of sand and glass. Yet even here, patterns of beauty would emerge. The horizon would shimmer with endless mirages. Rivers of hot air bending light like liquid. Dust devils, kilometers high, might dance across the endless noon, twisting silently, sculpted by heat. Above it all, the sky might lose its blue. With so much haze, so much scattering, the air could take on strange hues, white, orange, even violet at times. A day side that never ended, painted in alien colors. On the night side, the opposite fate. Without sunlight, heat would bleed into space. The ground would freeze hard as stone. Oceans would lock under kilometers of ice. The air itself, heavy and cold, might begin to condense, freezing into snow made of carbon dioxide. The stars would shine with brutal clarity, undimmed by sunlight or scattering. The Milky Way would blaze brighter than we have ever seen, and beneath it, silence. No wind, except what trickled down from the day side. No rain, no storms, only stillness, broken by the slow creep of glaciers, advancing into frozen seas. A side of Earth that was not just dark, but ancient, timeless, like the face of a dead world. And then, between the two, the twilight band. Here, heat from the day side would meet cold from the night side. Air would rush, constantly, never stopping. Winds not as violent as the first shattering gales, but steady, eternal, fierce. Clouds would form there, walls of vapor reaching to the edge of space. Storms would flicker with lightning, thunder rolling endlessly over mountains and plains. Rain would fall, not in seasons, but forever, feeding rivers that never stopped flowing. This is where life might survive. In a storm-washed strip, lit by a sun forever caught at the horizon. It would be harsh, yes, winds unending, rains relentless. But compared to the frozen night and the burning day, it would be a refuge. A twilight world born from stillness. If Earth stopped spinning, the oceans would not. At the equator, the surface of the Earth moves eastward faster than a jet plane. The seas, like the atmosphere, move with it. If the spin were to halt suddenly, the waters would surge onward, racing over land in walls of liquid mountains. Tsunamis beyond imagining, waves not of meters, but of continents. Shores erased, coastlines rewritten. Entire regions would drown in a single day. It is a terrifying image, yes, but like the air, the oceans too would calm. Water, patient and heavy, always seeks its level, and without rotation, its balance would change. The bulge of the equator, pushed outward by centrifugal force, would collapse. Oceans would retreat from the middle of the planet, creeping slowly toward the poles. Coastlines we know today would vanish. The Amazon basin might drain. Africa's deserts might bloom into shallow seas. Canada, Siberia, Greenland, once icebound, might drown beneath polar oceans. The Earth, without spin, would reshape its own map, not with fire or tectonics, but with the slow, deliberate redistribution of water. On the endless day side, the oceans would boil, not into steam entirely. The planet is too large, the sun too distant for Earth to become Venus, but the surface waters, exposed to ceaseless heat, would churn into storms of evaporation. Vast inland seas would shrink, their basins cracking with salt. Moisture would rise into the sky, feeding the twilight storms. Clouds would gather in towers, shading the surface only to break again in thunder and downpour. The seas that remained would grow shallow, sluggish, locked in cycles of evaporation and rain. Their surfaces would shimmer with mirages, glittering not with calm reflections but with haze. And yet, even here, beauty would persist. The light, stretched across endless noon, would paint the waters with strange colors: copper at the horizon, violet in the zenith, green where dust and rain mixed in the air, a sea forever at sunset. On the dark side, the oceans would freeze. First the surface, then deeper and deeper, until entire seas were capped with ice, kilometers thick. Beneath that frozen crust, though, liquid water might endure, warmed by geothermal heat, stirred by deep currents. Imagine vast caverns of water, silent, sealed away from the sky. Perhaps life would find its way there, as it has on Europa, Enceladus, moons where sunlight never reaches but warmth from within sustains hidden oceans. On the surface, glaciers would crawl slowly toward the twilight zone, crumbling into icebergs that drifted into permanent storm. And above it all, stars. Not softened by atmosphere, not hidden by light, but sharp and infinite. To stand on a frozen shore in eternal night would be to see the universe unveiled, bright enough to cast shadows, brilliant enough to feel like dawn, a dawn of stars, not sun. Between these extremes, the twilight band would be carved by rivers. Moisture from the day side would fall in endless rain at the border, gathering into torrents that surged toward the night. They would cut valleys, carve plains, shape landscapes unrecognizable to us. Water would never rest, evaporating under the sun, falling in storms, flowing across the band, freezing at last in the dark. A cycle not of days or seasons, but of eternity. Forests might grow there if life endured. Not like our forests, tuned to light and shadow, but strange twilight ecosystems, drenched in rain and buffeted by eternal wind. It would be the world's green band, narrow, fragile, alive against impossible odds. Today, weather is restless. Storms form, wander, dissolve. Rain comes and goes. Winds shift and swirl. The sky is a dance. Without rotation, that dance would freeze into position. Imagine looking up, day after day, and seeing the same storm overhead, the same clouds, the same lightning. Imagine knowing that the thunder you hear tonight is the same thunder your children will hear, and theirs after them. It would be frightening, yes, but also strangely comforting. The weather would become part of the landscape, as fixed as a mountain, as eternal as the sea. Lightning would carve the horizon like clockwork. Rain would be constant, filling rivers without end. Winds would never rest, never pause, but blow steady as tides. To live there would be to live in rhythm, not with days or nights, but with an atmosphere that had found its new balance. A world where weather no longer traveled. It simply was. Though terrifying to imagine, there is beauty here too. The storms of the twilight band, lit forever by a sun at the horizon, would glow like lanterns. Their clouds would catch the light, painting the sky in permanent sunset. Lightning would dance across them, silent from a distance, like veins of silver on canvas. The winds, constant and fierce, would sculpt landscapes into smooth plains, dunes like waves frozen in stone, mountains sharpened by endless gusts. Even the oceans, reshaped and relocated, would find peace. Polar seas shimmering beneath auroras, equatorial deserts sparkling with salt, twilight rivers glinting under eternal dusk. It would not be our Earth, but it would still be Earth. And in its alien stillness, it would still hold beauty. The first moments after the Earth's spin ceased would be filled with chaos. Winds tearing at continents, oceans rushing in tsunamis across the land. But chaos never lasts. Energy spent becomes stillness. Motion fades. And then, the planet would enter a new equilibrium. A quieter, stranger balance. The skies would no longer swirl restlessly from west to east. Instead, they would breathe like a single lung. Warm air rising on the endless day, cold air sinking on the endless night, currents sweeping back and forth between. The oceans would no longer circle the globe in gyres and loops. Instead, they would pool where gravity called them. Polar seas swelling, equatorial basins drying into salt flats. The Earth would be reborn, not destroyed. Different, but whole. From space, such a world would look unrecognizable. One hemisphere would gleam white with clouds and ice, a frozen marble of shadow. The other would blaze with desert, oceans shrunken and haze-colored, reflecting the golden fire of the sun. And between them, a narrow band of storms, a necklace of twilight circling the globe. It would be a planet of three faces, one of fire, one of ice, and one of dusk. Astronomers might mistake it for an exoplanet, an alien world orbiting a distant star. But it would be Earth, our Earth, transformed by stillness. At the boundary between heat and cold, storms would tower higher than any on our present Earth. Powered by an endless supply of rising air from the day side and sinking air from the night side, they would grow vast and permanent. Thunder would rumble not in bursts, but in a constant rolling murmur. Lightning would lace the sky in fractal veins. Rain would fall in sheets that never ended, carving rivers across the band of dusk. For us, storms are temporary. We wait for them to pass. On a still Earth, storms would not pass. They would be part of the landscape, as enduring as mountains, as certain as the sea. Even as the storms raged at the twilight boundary, winds would flow ceaselessly from day to night. They would not come as gales or gusts, but as steady, relentless streams, like rivers of air, a wind that never stopped blowing, whispering across plains, moaning through canyons, sculpting the land grain by grain. In the deserts of the dayside, those winds would raise dunes taller than skyscrapers, waves of sand frozen in motion. In the frozen wastes of the night, they would scour ice into patterns, etching swirls and ridges across glaciers. Wind would become the planet's heartbeat, constant, eternal, reshaping everything it touched. Without spin, the tilt of Earth would still bring seasons. The sun would move north and south over the year, shifting the twilight band with it. But the change would be slow, vast, and heavy. The storms would migrate like glaciers, drifting toward one hemisphere, then back again. The deserts of the dayside would expand and contract. The frozen night would advance and retreat. Seasons would no longer be weeks of change. They would be centuries. Civilizations, if they survived, would rise and fall beneath storms that moved only a little in a lifetime. It would be a climate of patience, a sky of permanence. It sounds harsh, alien, inhospitable, and yet imagine standing there, in the twilight band, where rain falls and winds whisper, where the sun forever hovers at the horizon. The light would be eternal sunset, painting the world in amber and gold. Shadows would stretch forever. Rivers would sparkle with stormlight. Even the storms, frightening in scale, would glow with beauty. Towering clouds catching the sun's low rays, lightning flashing within like lanterns, thunder rolling endlessly, steady and low, like the planet's new voice. It would not be Earth as we know it, but it would still be Earth, a still Earth, a living Earth, a beautiful Earth. And so, in imagining the immediate changes, the rush of winds, the roar of oceans, the birth of permanent storms, we come to see not only what would be lost, but what might be found. For the Earth is resilient. Its systems, though changed, would find balance again. Life, if given time, would adapt. New ecosystems would bloom in the twilight. New rhythms would be born. We fear change because it feels like loss, but change is also creation. Even in stillness, Earth would not be silent. It would breathe differently, move differently, look different, but it would still be alive. And perhaps, in imagining this strange stillness, we learn to appreciate the delicate motion we live within now. The storms that pass, the tides that return, the days that rise and fall, the turning that gives us time. In the last part, we watched the Earth's atmosphere reshape itself. We saw oceans surge, then settle. We listened to winds that never rest, storms that never die, skies that found a strange new balance. Now, we ask the harder question, what about life? For the planet is not just rock and water and air. It is also green shoots reaching toward the sun, wings that beat against the wind, voices that echo through the dusk. What would happen to these lives, small and fragile, if the Earth stopped spinning? On the sunward side, the light would never fade. At first, it might seem like paradise, an endless summer, a sun that never sets. But the gift of light would soon become a burden. Plants need darkness as much as they need day. Their chemistry, tuned across billions of years to cycles of light and dark, would falter without rhythm. Photosynthesis would race without pause, leaves burning in the furnace of constant noon. Some plants might survive, adapting to the relentless light. They might grow smaller, tougher, their leaves coated with wax to hold in water. Like desert cacti, they might learn to conserve, to slow their breath, to endure the blaze. Others might retreat underground, roots spreading deep into soils, sending up only small, hardened shoots when conditions allowed. Over time, perhaps entirely new forms of greenery would appear. Plants that feed not in cycles, but in streams, sipping sunlight endlessly, pulsing with energy like living solar panels. Yet for many, eternal day would be too much. Forests would wither, grasslands would burn, the face of the day side would be scorched into desert, broken only by oases where water lingered long enough to shield life from the blaze. On the dark side, the problem would be the opposite. No sunlight, no energy, no green at all. Here, plants as we know them could not survive. The endless night would strip them of their fuel. Photosynthesis would fall silent. Forests would die, fields would vanish, roots would freeze in the soil. But life has ways of finding cracks in the impossible. In caves beneath the ice, near volcanic vents, in pockets warmed by geothermal heat, new ecosystems might bloom. Not green, but pale. Fungi, lichens, strange plants that feed not on sunlight, but on chemical energy, as some do even now in the deepest oceans. Perhaps forests of white and silver would grow in the darkness, fed by minerals, glowing faintly with bioluminescence. A beauty we cannot imagine, alien and soft, thriving in the absence of light. The night side would be a kingdom not of green, but of shadow. But in the narrow band between, the twilight strip, plants would cling most fiercely. Here, the sun would hover low, never rising, never setting. Light enough to feed photosynthesis, but dim enough to allow rest. Imagine fields of perpetual dusk, forests of long shadows, flowers that never close, never wait for dawn. In this twilight world, plants might thrive in ways they never could before. No scorching noons, no freezing nights, just steady light, steady rain, steady winds. These would be the gardens of a still earth, lush and green, stretching across the narrow strip where balance still breathed. Where plants endure, animals follow. On the day side, creatures would scatter. Many would die in the heat, unable to find shelter. But some would adapt. Reptiles basking in endless warmth might grow large, like the lizards of ancient deserts. Insects might evolve armor against heat, scuttling from shadow to shadow. On the night side, animals would vanish into the dark, yet some might remain. Creatures of ice, pale and slow, feeding on fungi, lichen, and the faint scraps of chemical life. Eyes would become huge to drink the starlight, or vanish altogether in creatures that navigated by touch and sound. But the twilight band, that narrow ribbon of dusk, would be where most life gathered. Here, herds might roam endlessly, following rivers that never dried. Birds might fly against winds that never stopped. Insects would buzz in the eternal glow, pollinating flowers that never closed. Predators would stalk the half-light, their shadows stretching long but never vanishing. Prey would graze in the dim, always alert, always half-hidden in twilight. Life would not vanish. It would migrate. It would gather where balance remained. The twilight band would not just be a place. It would be a refuge, a sanctuary, a corridor of survival. Imagine vast herds moving back and forth along the twilight strip, not because of seasons, but because of subtle shifts in temperature as the sun's position drifted slightly north or south across the year. Animals might follow the storm line, grazing where rain fell, fleeing when the floods grew too strong. Others might cling to the borders, testing the heat of the day side or the cold of the night, living at the edge of extremes. Birds, if they survived, might circle endlessly around the globe, always keeping to the dusk. Fish might swim rivers that flowed from light to dark, feeding in twilight seas. The migrations would never end, not in weeks or months, but in lifetimes. For on a still earth, life would be nomadic, always chasing balance, never finding rest. Picture this now, a world where green clings to dusk, where animals circle endlessly, where life itself moves in a band across the planet. One side is fire, one side is ice, and between them life flickers like a candle, carried forward by wind and rain. It is fragile, it is strange, but it is alive. If Earth stopped spinning, we would not vanish overnight. Humanity, resilient and stubborn, would search for balance just as plants and animals would. But balance would exist only in one place: the twilight band. Here, where the sun forever lingered at the horizon, there would still be warmth and water. The storms, though fierce, would bring endless rain. Rivers would flow, winds would breathe, and the land would support crops. It would not be easy. Winds would howl without pause. Thunder would rumble forever. But compared to the scorched day and the frozen night, this thin strip would be paradise. Some might try to endure the dayside. At first, cities could rise near seas, using water to cool and irrigate. Solar energy would flow without end, powering machines, fueling life. But the heat would grow unbearable. Crops would wither. Water would vanish. Deserts would spread, swallowing fields and villages. Only the most resourceful could endure. In underground dwellings, shielded from the heat, venturing out only under storms that brought rare shade. Perhaps machines would harvest solar energy and pipe it into twilight cities. Perhaps vast mirrors would reflect light away, cooling small enclaves. But over centuries, the dayside would empty. Its silence would deepen, its cities abandoned, its monuments swallowed by sand. The night side would be even harsher. At first, humans might try to hold on. Nuclear power, geothermal heat, fusion reactors. Sources of energy that do not depend on sunlight. Cities might glow beneath the stars, brilliant and proud. But the cold would keep pressing. The ice would advance. Crops would fail in frozen soil. Supply lines from the twilight would falter under endless storms. Perhaps a few would remain in domed habitats, warmed by technology, mining the frozen earth. But most would retreat, leaving behind ghost cities entombed in ice. The night side would belong not to humans, but to silence. And so, most of humanity would gather in the dusk. Imagine a band of cities circling the globe like a necklace, strung along the eternal horizon. Each city facing a sun that never moved, glowing faintly above the storm line. Each city battered by endless winds, watered by endless rain. These would be the twilight civilizations, stretched thin but connected. Perhaps nations would dissolve into a single belt of humanity, one culture winding around the world. Travel would be strange. You would not cross time zones. There would be no east or west, no morning or evening. There would only be the sun frozen at the horizon, reminding you always that you lived in the dusk. But how would we measure time when the sun no longer rose or set? At first, we might cling to the old rhythm, artificial lights that dimmed and brightened, clocks that ticked through 24 hours, weeks, months, years, borrowed from the memory of spin. But as generations passed, those rhythms might fade. Children might sleep when they were tired, wake when they were ready. Work might stretch in cycles of weeks instead of hours. Calendars might follow only the slow march of the seasons, as the sun drifted north and south in the sky. A year would remain, but the day might vanish. Time itself would change. Imagine living without mornings, without evenings, only existence stretched like twilight, unbroken, eternal. Life in the twilight band would not be gentle. The winds, steady and fierce, would howl through streets. Buildings would need to be anchored deep, streamlined to resist the constant force. Towers might lean with the wind, curved like sails. Homes might be built low, clustered together for strength. The storms would bring endless rain. Streets would flow like rivers. Fields would flood. Rivers would swell. But water is life, and people would learn to live with it. Perhaps canals would become highways, boats as common as carts. Energy would be plentiful. Endless rain to drive turbines, endless wind to turn blades. Humanity, fragile but clever, would adapt, building cities that hummed with stormlight. The twilight band would be harsh, yes, but it would also be rich. In such a world, culture itself might shift. On our spinning Earth, societies are shaped by cycles, by the coming of day, by the change of seasons, by the harvest. In the still Earth, those cycles would vanish. Harvest would come not once a year, but constantly, fed by endless rain and steady light. Work might be unbroken, a slow rhythm without pause. Leisure might not be tied to sunset, but to personal choice. Stories would change too. Myths of dawn and dusk would fade, replaced by tales of the two extremes, the land of fire, the land of ice, and the courage of those who ventured there. Even language might change. Words for morning and evening might vanish, replaced by terms for directions. Toward the day, toward the night, toward the sun, away from it. Society itself would be rewritten, not by war or invention, but by stillness. Yet the twilight band would not be endless. Narrow, fragile, it could only support so much life. Perhaps humanity would crowd along its length, every fertile valley claimed, every river shared. Conflict might rise, not between nations, but between neighbors pressed together in the narrow dusk. Or perhaps cooperation would bloom. A belt of cities, connected by shared winds and shared storms, might weave together into one civilization, global in a way our spinning Earth has never known. Survival would depend on balance, with each other, with the planet, with the fragile ribbon of life that remained. And so, picture it, cities strung like pearls around the planet, glowing in eternal twilight, streets washed by rain, towers bent to the wind, people moving beneath a sun that never rises, never sets. Beyond them, deserts of fire, behind them, glaciers of ice. But here in the dusk, life continues. Humanity continues. Strange, harsh, beautiful. Over generations, humanity would change. Not in the dramatic, cinematic sense, but quietly, in bone, in breath, in the rhythms of life. Children born into the twilight would never know dawn or dusk. They would not grow up chasing the golden edge of sunrise or watching the long shadows of evening fall. To them, the sun would simply be a low, eternal glow along the horizon. Their eyes might grow sharper in dim light, able to see colors in the half-dark where we would see only gray. Their skin might grow thicker, resistant to endless rain and wind. Their lungs might learn to breathe in air that was always restless, never still. They would be us, and yet not us. A humanity softened and reshaped by twilight, and yet memory would remain. Stories would be told of the day side, the land of endless fire, where the sun hung high and fierce and deserts stretched forever. And of the night side, the land of eternal stars, where the sky glittered with galaxies and the earth froze into silence. Children would listen wide-eyed, the way we once listened to myths of dragons and gods. These extremes would become places of legend, rarely visited, too harsh for daily life. But in the imagination, they would loom large. Perhaps brave explorers would set out, wrapped in suits against the heat or cold, to gather stories, minerals, or simply the experience of touching the edges of survival. They would return with tales of brilliance and silence, fire and ice. The twilight civilizations would be built not just on geography, but on myth. In such a world, spirituality might change too. On our spinning Earth, many religions grew around cycles: rebirth, sunrise, harvest, renewal. In a still Earth, cycles would fade. The sun would never move. Night would never come. Perhaps faith would turn toward the horizon itself. That thin band of light dividing fire and frost. People might see it as sacred, the balance that allows life. Shrines might be built facing the sun, not to watch it rise or set, but simply to honor its eternal glow. The twilight might be seen as holy, the line between extremes, the fragile balance where life endures. And in that belief, humanity might find not despair, but hope. But the twilight is narrow. Only a fraction of the Earth would be livable. Humanity would be pressed close, cultures entwined, neighbors unavoidable. Would we learn cooperation or conflict? Perhaps wars would break out over rivers, fertile soil, the shifting edges of habitable land. Armies clashing not east against west, but dusk against dusk. Or perhaps cooperation would bloom instead. After all, in a world so fragile, survival would depend on it. Shared winds, shared rain, shared storms. The Earth would teach us patience. It would teach us humility. That life to endure must live in balance. And here is the strange part. This thought experiment, this still Earth, echoes our real one. Even now we live in a narrow band of balance. Too much carbon, and we heat. Too little, and we freeze. Too much extraction, and ecosystems collapse. Too little care, and the systems that cradle us falter. Our spinning Earth gives us days and nights, storms that pass, tides that return. Yet even with all that balance, we live at the edge, as fragile as those who might one day live in eternal twilight. In imagining their world, we glimpse our own. So let's return once more to the twilight cities. Picture them. Towers curved like sails, bending with the wind. Streets flowing with canals, lit by lanterns that flicker in endless rain. Fields of crops glistening beneath a sun that never rises, never sets. Children playing in puddles, their laughter carried by the storm. Elders sitting at doorways, watching the horizon glow. Markets bustling with voices, selling food grown in dusk. Life continuing, life adapting, life enduring. It would not be easy. It would not be gentle, but it would be life. And so, in imagining part 3, life without rotation, we see not only hardship, but resilience. Plants finding ways to sip eternal light or grow in eternal dark. Animals migrating endlessly around the globe, chasing balance. Humans building cities in dusk, shaping cultures around storms, winds, and the eternal horizon. A planet divided into 3 realms: fire, ice, and twilight, and yet still alive, still breathing. Life does not give up easily. It bends, it shifts, it migrates, it invents, it endures. We have seen how the air, the seas, and even life itself might respond to a still Earth. In the next part, we'll go deeper. Beyond plants and animals, beyond people, into the bones of the planet itself. The tectonic plates, the molten core, the magnetic field. How would geology respond to stillness? What would happen to the very foundations of Earth without its spin? For now, rest in the image of twilight cities, glowing under eternal sunset, of rivers flowing forever into dusk, of a humanity that endures, fragile but unbroken, In a world remade by silence, we have drifted through skies without motion. We have stood in deserts of fire, walked across glaciers of silence, and wandered into twilight cities strung along the horizon. But now, let's go deeper, beneath our feet, beneath the soil, beneath the stone, into the restless body of the planet itself. Because while life on the surface would bend and adapt, the Earth's own bones would tell an even stranger story if the world ever stopped spinning. So, let's descend. Earth's crust, the thin shell we walk upon, is not still even now. It drifts and shifts, split into plates that move slowly across the mantle. Mountains rise, valleys sink, oceans open and close, all because the crust floats on molten rock below. But what does Earth's rotation have to do with this? The spin of our planet doesn't drive tectonic plates directly. That's the work of heat, pressure, and convection. But rotation does influence the balance. It stabilizes the planet's shape, pulling it outward at the equator, making Earth slightly flattened at the poles. If the spin stopped, that balance would vanish. The bulge at the equator, all that extra water and land spread wider by centrifugal force, would slowly relax. Earth would settle into a more perfect sphere. What does that mean for the ground beneath us? Imagine mountains collapsing slowly inward, rivers redrawing their courses, oceans migrating away from the equator toward the poles. Over centuries, the redistribution of mass would stress the crust. Tectonic plates would grind harder, fault lines would stretch and twist, volcanoes would rumble as magma sought new paths. It would not be a single catastrophic quake, but a slow rearrangement, the kind that would turn coastlines to deserts and deserts to seabeds. The equator, once heavy with water, would dry into vast plains. The poles, once lighter, would sink under new oceans. Our maps, our borders, even the familiar shape of Earth's continents, all would be rewritten, quietly but inexorably, by gravity reclaiming its balance. As the crust adjusted, earthquakes would ripple across the world. Imagine centuries of tremors, the Earth never quite finding rest. Cities in the twilight belt would not only battle storms and floods, but also shifting ground beneath them. Volcanoes would rise in unexpected places, triggered by the release of pressure. Old ranges might collapse while new mountains thrust upward. The still Earth would not be still at all. Beneath the silence of the skies, the ground itself would groan. Below the crust lies the mantle, thick, hot, slow-flowing. The mantle drives tectonics with its convection currents, rising where it is hot, sinking where it cools. Would the mantle care if Earth stopped spinning? Not directly. The heat of Earth's interior comes from radioactive decay and the slow release of energy trapped since the planet's birth. That would continue. But the redistribution of oceans and crust would press differently on the mantle. Like pressing on one side of a balloon, it would bulge and shift, altering the flow. Currents would change course. Some regions would grow restless, others might fall quiet. The still Earth would not end tectonics, but it would change their rhythm, their voice, their dance. So picture it. Twilight cities built in the dusk, and beneath them, the crust trembling, reshaping, never quite steady. Mountains rising where none were before. Rivers carving new paths. Oceans slowly migrating toward the poles, swallowing one shoreline after another. The surface might seem eternal, but it is only skin stretched over fire. A skin that never forgets to shift. Beneath the crust, Beneath the mantle lies Earth's beating heart, the core. It is made of iron and nickel, split into two layers, a molten outer core, swirling and restless, and a solid inner core, dense and hot beyond imagining. Together, they are the engine of our planet. The core spins, not in perfect harmony with Earth's crust, but slightly faster, drifting ahead as though the heart of Earth beats to its own tempo. And that motion, liquid iron flowing around solid iron, is what generates something essential for life: Earth's magnetic field. The magnetic field arises from what scientists call the geodynamo. Picture rivers of molten iron, thousands of kilometers below your feet, flowing as Earth spins. These flows create electric currents, and those currents, in turn, generate a magnetic field. It is this field that stretches far beyond our atmosphere, forming a bubble around Earth called the magnetosphere. Without it, the solar wind, streams of charged particles from the Sun, would strip away our atmosphere, as it did with Mars long ago. Every compass needle that points north is a reminder of this invisible shield. Every aurora dancing at the poles is its shimmering signature. So, what happens to the dynamo when Earth stops? The flow of molten iron depends partly on heat convection, hot iron rising, cool iron sinking. That would continue, at least for a time, but the symmetry, the balance, the added push of rotation, those would vanish. Without spin, the geodynamo could weaken. The magnetic field could falter, wobble, or even collapse. Imagine a world where compass needles no longer point north, where auroras fade from the skies, where the protective bubble shrinks, exposing Earth to the full force of solar wind. The air, already fragile in a still world, would be stripped more easily. The atmosphere would thin, oceans would evaporate faster, radiation from the sun would reach the ground unchecked. Life in the twilight might endure storms of solar particles, invisible, dangerous, relentless. Would it happen overnight? Number the core is vast, and its momentum immense. Even if the Earth's crust stopped spinning, the outer core might continue swirling for centuries, carrying echoes of the old rotation. But slowly, inevitably, the dynamo would decay. The magnetic field would weaken, falter, fragment. Earth would become vulnerable. So, picture this: a still Earth, silent skies, twilight cities clinging to balance, and above them, a fragile atmosphere slowly stripped, a magnetic field flickering and failing. The crust trembles, the core weakens, the shield thins, and yet, even in this vulnerability, life clings on. To truly understand what a still Earth might become, we must step back, out of the twilight, out of the storms, even out of Earth itself. We must look outward, toward our neighbors in the solar system and beyond, because Earth is not alone. Other worlds spin faster, slower, or hardly at all. And each carries lessons about what happens when the cosmic dance takes a different rhythm. First, Mars. Today, Mars is a frozen desert, wrapped in thin air. But long ago, it may have been warm and wet, with rivers, lakes, and even seas. So what happened? Mars once had a magnetic field like Earth's. But because Mars is smaller, its core cooled more quickly. The dynamo inside weakened and stopped. Without a shield, the solar wind stripped its atmosphere, leaving behind the barren world we see today. When we imagine Earth without spin, without a magnetic field, Mars offers a haunting preview: skies that fade, oceans that vanish, a planet that forgets how to keep life safe. Then there is Venus, Earth's twin in size but not in spirit. Venus rotates so slowly that its day lasts longer than its year. Clouds of carbon dioxide choke its sky. Surface temperatures are hot enough to melt lead. Here, we see a different fate, not stripped like Mars, but suffocated. A world where stillness led not to silence, but to runaway heat, an atmosphere out of control. If Earth stopped spinning, one side scorched by eternal sun, one side frozen in eternal night. Venus whispers to us what might happen if balance is lost. Mercury, closest to the sun, once spun more freely. But over time, gravity from the sun slowed its rotation until it became locked in a resonance. Turning 3 times for every 2 orbits, its surface now bakes and freezes, day after endless day, night after endless night. In Mercury, we see the truth. Celestial bodies can lose their spin. Gravity remembers and friction slows until a world no longer turns. Earth is not immune, and far beyond our solar system, astronomers have discovered countless exoplanets locked to their stars. One face always burning, one always frozen, with a narrow twilight band where the chance of life still flickers. This twilight world is not just theory. It is reality, scattered across the galaxy. Some scientists even believe that if life exists elsewhere, it may cling to those narrow ribbons of dusk and dawn. So when we imagine a still Earth, we are not dreaming alone. We are glimpsing the story of many worlds. Mars shows us the fragility of a lost shield. Venus shows us the chaos of heat and stillness. Mercury shows us that time can always slow a spin. Exoplanets show us that twilight worlds may be common, perhaps even cradle life. Earth's stillness would not be unique. It would be part of a greater pattern, a reminder that the universe holds many ways for a world to turn, or not to turn at all. So let's return gently to our own still Earth. We have walked upon trembling crust, descended to the core, watched the shield falter, and then lifted our eyes to see other planets echoing our imagined fate. In every case, the lesson is clear. Rotation is not forever. Spin is a gift, fragile and finite. And when it is gone, a world does not end, but it changes profoundly into something new. So here we are, back in the twilight band, where humanity builds its last cities. Above, the magnetosphere flickers. Below, the crust groans. Beyond, the stars shine down, timeless and indifferent. But Earth still whispers its story, even without motion. A story of fire, stone, and sky, of cosmic rhythms and planetary fates. And the story, as always, continues. Now let us turn inward, not to the future, but to the past. Because Earth has always been a world of upheaval. Long before people, long before forests, even long before simple creatures learned to breathe, Earth was shifting, remaking itself, testing the boundaries of what life could endure. If we want to imagine the deep transformation of a still Earth, we can look to the scars and triumphs already etched into its ancient memory. Over 700 million years ago, Earth froze. The oceans turned to ice, stretching from the poles almost to the equator. White continents and white seas reflected sunlight back into space, and the planet grew colder still. This was Snowball Earth. Imagine it, a globe wrapped in glittering ice, a silent frozen jewel drifting through space. Winds howled across endless plains of white. Beneath kilometers of ice, the oceans slumbered, dark and still. Life endured only in pockets, in cracks beneath the ice, near volcanic vents, or where thin sheets of water still stirred. It was one of the most extreme transformations Earth ever faced. And yet, life survived. Volcanoes slowly built up carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, trapping heat. Eventually, the ice melted. Seas returned. Life emerged again, ready to diversify into new forms. Snowball Earth teaches us resilience. Even in stillness, even in silence, life clings on. But long before Snowball Earth, another upheaval reshaped the planet. Around 2.4 billion years ago, tiny organisms called cyanobacteria discovered a way to capture sunlight and release oxygen. Slowly, they filled the oceans and skies with this new gas. At first, it was poison. Oxygen was deadly to most early life, which had evolved in an anoxic world. Entire microbial kingdoms withered and vanished. But from this catastrophe came possibility. Oxygen built the ozone layer, protecting Earth from radiation. It allowed more complex metabolisms, fueling multicellular life. The Great Oxygenation Event was both destruction and creation, a reminder that upheaval is not always the end, but sometimes the beginning. If Earth without spin feels like a catastrophe, the oxygenation shows us. Out of endings, new stories emerge. Snowball Earth froze the seas. Oxygenation poisoned the skies. Yet both led to growth, renewal, and transformation. Earth's history is not a steady march forward. It is a cycle of catastrophe and renewal, of extinction and evolution. In this rhythm, a still Earth would be another chapter. Harsh, strange, perhaps terrifying, but not final. Even without spin, even in twilight cities or frozen wastes, life would find a way, just as it has before. One truth we learn from deep time is patience. Snowball Earth lasted millions of years. The Great Oxygenation unfolded over eons. To us, a stopped Earth feels immediate, urgent, apocalyptic. But in Earth's scale, upheaval is slow, patient, almost meditative. The planet breathes in epochs, not in moments. And so, when we imagine a still Earth, perhaps we can see it not as a sudden doom, but as part of this long, patient rhythm. A new phase in a story written not in centuries, but in billions of years. So let's pause here, in this ancient reflection. Picture Earth wrapped in ice, its seas silent, its skies pale. Picture oxygen rising, invisible but deadly, transforming the very air. Picture catastrophe giving way to newness. These are not just stories of the past. They are echoes of what may come. Earth has stopped, will stop, may stop. But always, always, the story continues. Earth has carried life for over 3.5 billion years. But that journey has not been smooth. Again and again, the planet has faced moments of crisis when most living things perished and only a few threads carried the story forward. Scientists call them mass extinctions. They are punctuation marks in the book of life, and in their silence, we hear echoes of what a still Earth might bring. The most profound of these extinctions happened about 252 million years ago. It is known as the Permian-Triassic extinction, or more starkly, the Great Dying. Volcanoes in Siberia erupted for thousands of years, pouring lava, ash, and gases into the air. Carbon dioxide and methane filled the atmosphere, warming the planet. Oceans grew acidic, suffocating marine life. By the time it ended, more than 90% of species had vanished. Forests withered, reefs collapsed. The Earth itself seemed empty, stripped of diversity. And yet, it was not the end. Out of the quiet, new forms emerged. Early reptiles gave rise to the first dinosaurs. Surviving plants recolonized barren ground. The world was reshaped. Even in the deepest darkness, life carried forward. Another extinction was sudden, violent, unforgettable. 66 million years ago, A rock from space struck Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The Chicxulub impact. In seconds, forests burned, seas boiled, and skies filled with dust. Sunlight vanished, temperatures plunged. The age of dinosaurs, rulers of the Earth for over 150 million years, ended in a heartbeat. And yet, this too was not final. Tiny mammals, once overshadowed, found space to flourish. Birds, descended from dinosaurs, rose to the skies. The path was cleared for new worlds, new possibilities. In the silence after catastrophe, new voices always emerge. Not all crises came from space. Some came from the Earth itself. Volcanoes, vast and ancient, have cloaked the skies in ash many times. The Deccan Traps in India, erupting at the same time as the Chicxulub impact, darkened skies and poisoned air. Later, eruptions in Siberia and Iceland brought years of volcanic winter, where sunlight weakened and harvests failed. These winters remind us how fragile balance can be. A change in the air, the loss of the sun, and the rhythm of life falters. So too would it be if Earth stopped spinning. The eternal day of one hemisphere, the endless night of the other, both echo volcanic winters, when the sun disappeared or shone too harshly. The lessons are the same. Life adapts, or it fades. When we step back, we see a pattern. Extinctions cleanse, but also renew. Impacts destroy, but also open doors. Volcanoes choke, but eventually nourish. Earth is not fragile glass. It is living stone, always reshaping itself. So when we imagine a still Earth, unspun and strange, we should not see it only as doom. We should see it as another chapter in this ancient cycle of loss and rebirth. What these stories teach us is this: stability is not the natural state. Change is. The continents drift. The air thickens and thins. The oceans freeze and thaw. And life always bends, breaks, and blooms anew. The stopping of Earth's spin would feel like an ending. But in the patient rhythm of deep time, it would be only another turning of the page. Each upheaval tells us something. Snowball Earth whispers of endurance, that even when seas are frozen solid, life will cling to vents and shadows, waiting for warmth. The great oxygenation reminds us that what begins as poison may become possibility. Catastrophe can seed creation. The great dying warns us of fragility, that even mighty forests and endless reefs can vanish in fire and gas. The Chicxulub impact shows us that endings can come in an instant, that the sky itself can betray us. And the volcanic winters reveal that even the sun, our oldest friend, can be hidden, leaving us to stumble through twilight. Together, they teach one lesson. Change is not the exception. Change is the rule. When we imagine Earth stopping its spin, we feel the strangeness, the fear. But in deep time, we see that strangeness has always been Earth's nature: a frozen world, a poisoned sky, a fiery extinction. These are not hypotheticals. They are history. So a still Earth would not be alien. It would simply be another mask. Another experiment in the grand unfolding of possibility. Life would falter. Life would adapt. And in time, life would flourish again, in forms we cannot imagine. One of the gentlest lessons from deep time is patience. Stones do not hurry. Continents drift slowly, yet they remake oceans and mountains. Ice sheets creep forward inch by inch, yet they carve valleys deeper than rivers. Volcanoes wait centuries, then awaken in fire. Earth does not rush. It breathes in ages. So when we feel the shock of a thought experiment, the sudden stopping of Earth's spin, we can breathe slower, deeper. For the planet, Such transformations are not abrupt. They are part of its long, patient story. And life, small and fragile, proves just as patient. Microbes endure in boiling springs and beneath Antarctic ice. Seeds wait for decades in dry soil, then bloom at the first touch of rain. Creatures adapt to darkness, to salt, to heat, to cold. So too would life adapt to a still earth. Perhaps new forests would grow in the twilight zones, watered by gentle rains. Perhaps animals would migrate endlessly, following the edge of dusk. Perhaps human beings would build cities on rails of shadow, learning to balance between eternal day and night. It would not be easy, but deep time tells us it would not be impossible. In the rush of daily life, change feels overwhelming. But through the lens of Earth's memory, change is natural, almost soothing. The Earth has been ice, furnace, ocean world, desert world, green world, barren world. It has carried poisons and blessings, silence and music. And always, it has endured. So too, perhaps, would we. If the Earth were to stop spinning, survival would depend on balance, not just physical, but human. On one side of the planet, the sun would blaze endlessly, baking soil into dust, boiling seas into vapor, and stretching shadows into eternity. On the other side, night would reign without end, freezing land into tundra, locking rivers into ice, and burying landscapes in darkness. But between them, there would be a band of twilight, the delicate strip where day and night meet but never move. Here, perhaps, humanity would endure. Imagine cities rising in that narrow zone where the sun hovers forever on the horizon, windmills turning in the endless breezes between hot and cold, crops grown in carefully shielded domes, watered by condensed vapor, fed by carefully rationed soils. It would not be an easy life, but it would be possible. The homes of this still earth would not look like ours. Walls would be thick to hold in warmth on the frozen side, or to keep out the heat on the scorched side. Roofs would collect condensation, every drop of water precious. Tunnels and underground chambers might shelter people from the extremes above, a balance between warmth and cold, between light and dark. Energy would be drawn from contrasts, solar arrays drinking the eternal sun on one horizon, while geothermal vents and wind turbines harness the restless atmosphere. Where balance exists, humans find a way. Without rotation, farming would be harder, but not impossible. On the scorched side, fields could be shaded, cooled, and irrigated with recycled water. On the frozen side, heated greenhouses might bring life to barren soils. And in the twilight zones, vertical farms might glow with artificial light, powered by the unending sun just beyond the horizon. The ocean, too, might provide. Where ice and heat meet, nutrients would swirl, feeding algae and plankton, the base of a fragile food chain. Fishing communities might cling to these zones, harvesting what the seas allow. Humanity has always been a gardener of edges, the edges of rivers, of forests, of deserts. A still earth would simply sharpen the edge. But survival is not only about food and shelter, it is also about story. In a world without rotation, cultures would change. The people of the eternal day might worship the blazing sun, crafting myths of fire, energy, and endurance. The people of the endless night might revere the stars, seeing eternity in their brilliance. And those who lived in the twilight would tell stories of balance, of walking always between extremes. Festivals might honor the fragile harmony of their band of life. Songs would be written of dusk and dawn, never moving, never changing. In every settlement, The rhythm of culture would mirror the rhythm of survival. Delicate, patient, unyielding, a still earth would change not only culture, but spirit. In the endless day, the sun might feel oppressive, its constant gaze a symbol of trial and vigilance. In the endless night, the stars might offer comfort, a reminder of infinity and silence. And in the twilight, perhaps humanity would find a gentler wisdom, the idea that balance is sacred, that life is born not of extremes but of their meeting. New religions might rise, not around cycles of time, but around stillness. Pilgrims might journey to the edge of eternal day or the center of eternal night to test themselves, to seek visions, to meet the silence. The human story would deepen, as it always does, in the face of challenge. And yet, perhaps the strangest challenge would be this. Without rotation, there would be no days, no nights, no dawn, no dusk. How would humanity measure time without the turning of Earth? Perhaps clocks would still tick, built on the steady swing of pendulums or the vibration of crystals. Perhaps calendars would follow the march of the seasons, for Earth would still orbit the sun, still lean on its tilted axis, still bring the long arcs of summer and winter. But the human sense of time, once rooted in sunrises and sunsets, would fracture. Children might grow up never knowing what it means to see a morning after night. Elders might tell stories of days that once followed one another, when shadows moved, when stars wheeled overhead. Time would become abstract, a thing of machines, not of nature, a rhythm of invention, not of sky. In a world of extremes, cooperation would be the greatest currency. Communities would cluster in the twilight band, but the pressure of survival would give rise to new alliances, new structures. Some cities might be nomadic, sliding along the edge of dusk with the shifting climate zones, their homes portable, their lives in motion. Others might dig deep into the earth, carving sanctuaries where temperature remains steady, where roots of survival can grow. Trade would link these different ways of life. The people of the eternal day might provide solar power, abundant in their radiant land. The people of the night might mine resources from frozen earth, or harvest rare gases. And those in the twilight would broker exchanges, their settlements, crossroads of light and dark. Instead of nations defined by borders, societies might be defined by their relationship to the eternal sky above. Yet even as humanity adapts, memory would linger. Stories would be told of an earth that once turned, of mornings that followed nights, of sunsets that painted the horizon in colors no still earth could hold. Children would listen wide-eyed to tales of a living sky, where stars moved and the moon danced. In some places, these stories might be remembered as myth, legends of a time so strange it could not be true. In others, they might become scripture, sacred texts that speak of a paradise lost. Perhaps old calendars, carried through generations, would be read like relics, their weeks and months a puzzle from another age. In the stillness, the spinning earth would live on in memory, myth, and dream. And yet, for all its hardship, a still earth would also spark creativity. Art would thrive in the eternal twilight. Painters would capture the gentle glow of a horizon that never changes. Musicians would write songs without rhythm, melodies that drift like endless dusk. Poets would describe the patience of the unmoving sky, the strange eternity of their days. Even architecture would become art. Towers reaching toward the horizon sun, bridges spanning between shadow and flame, gardens designed to bloom in half-light. Where survival demands creativity, culture blooms, and perhaps in time the still earth would teach us something profound. In the spinning earth, we learned rhythm, day and night, work and rest, birth and death. But in the still earth, we would learn balance. Balance between hot and cold, between light and dark, between despair and hope. Balance between memory of what was and acceptance of what is. The endless twilight would become a metaphor for life itself, for walking the line between extremes, for finding beauty in the in-between. Even without rotation, humanity would not surrender its need for time. Perhaps clocks would become sacred objects, reminders of rhythm in a world without it. Perhaps rituals would be marked by artificial cycles, bells ringing every 12 hours, lights dimming and brightening to mimic a sun that no longer rises or sets. Children would learn to count not by days, but by heartbeats, by machines, by stories. Time would no longer be in the sky, it would be in us. And perhaps that too would be a lesson. The time is not only cosmic, but human. So in the still earth, humanity would survive. We would build, trade, remember, create. We would worship, laugh and mourn. We would turn adversity into culture, silence into song, stillness into story. Because that is what we have always done. And as we look back on the spinning earth, we would understand something soft and simple. That no matter the sky above us, the true story of Earth is not only in stone or air, but in us, in our resilience, after wandering through a world where Earth has stopped its turning. Let us return, gently, slowly, with care, to the Earth we know. Take a breath, feel it fill your chest, rise and fall. The air you breathe is part of the rhythm of a spinning planet. The winds that touched it were stirred by rotation, by the Coriolis dance that shapes storms and guides clouds. Every breath you take is tied to the turning of the earth. As you listen, you might notice the faintest sense of movement in the quiet. Not movement you can see, but movement you are part of. You are being carried eastward at hundreds of meters per second. The floor beneath you, the bed where you lie, the chair where you sit, all of it is moving with the planet. And yet, to you, it feels still. That is the paradox of our world. Immense motion, wrapped in perfect calm. The spin is not only a detail of physics, it is the stage on which life plays its song. It gives us days and nights, the slow alternation that plants rely on, that animals migrate with, that humans use to tell stories of beginnings and endings. It shapes weather, bending winds into spirals, feeding rains, calming deserts. It stirs the seas, sending tides against shorelines, cradling life in gentle ebb and flow. Without the spin, we imagined endless sun and eternal night. But with it, we are given rhythm. The tender cadence of morning after darkness, of dusk after heat. It is this turning, so constant we forget it, that makes Earth a home for life. Pause here and let that truth settle, that the ground you stand on is not still, but a dancer, moving always, giving always. When Earth spins, it offers us rhythm. Think of your own day. Sunrise spilling light into your room, shadows stretching and shrinking, the sky deepening into evening. Think of how your body rests at night, how it wakes with light. You are not separate from the spin. You are tuned to it, like an instrument. Your heartbeat, steady and unending, echoes this rhythm. The rise and fall of your breath mirrors it. Even the cycles of thought and dream, work and rest, joy and sorrow, All of them belong to rhythm. The Earth's spin is not just background. It is the heartbeat of the planet itself. So as we return from the still Earth, let us look with new eyes at the Earth as it is. Gratitude does not need to be grand. It can be simple, small. The warmth of sun on your skin after a cool night, the sound of waves arriving, then leaving, the flicker of stars wheeling slowly overhead. These are gifts of the spin. Perhaps tomorrow, when you see the morning light, you will feel it differently, not just as the start of a day, but as a reminder that the Earth turned faithfully once again, that while you rested, it carried you onward, gently, effortlessly. We live on a planet that does not need our notice to keep moving, but perhaps it is a kindness to notice. And what of us, humans? In our thought experiment, we imagined surviving even the extremes: endless day, endless night, frozen seas, burning deserts. We saw ourselves building, trading, remembering, creating. And perhaps that is the truest part of the story, that resilience is as much a part of us as breath. We are a species that adapts, that learns, that finds meaning even in silence, story even in stillness. And so when we return to the real Earth, we bring that truth back with us, that we are resilient, that life is resilient, that even in fragility, there is strength. The Earth spins, and with each turn, we find ways to continue. The Earth is spinning. It always has since its birth from dust and flame. It always will, until ages beyond imagining. Its motion is steady, faithful, invisible. It is the lullaby beneath every life, the silent turning that keeps sea and sky alive. Even when you forget it, even when you cannot feel it, the Earth is carrying you, turning you toward tomorrow, turning you toward light after night, calm after storm, turning you toward beginnings that wait just over the horizon. You do not need to hold the Earth steady. You do not need to make it move. You need only rest in its turning. So, let go now. Let go of the imagined extremes, the frozen nights, the blazing days. Let go of the weight of thought. You are here on the living Earth, turning gently beneath the stars. You are safe in its rhythm. You are held in its motion. You are part of its story. Allow that story to cradle you now, the way a rocking boat carries its passengers, the way a parent sways a child to sleep. The Earth is spinning, and with each turn, you are carried deeper into rest. Because the story of Earth isn't over, it's just getting started. Until then, sleep well, stay curious, and remember, you are not just on Earth, you are of it. Good night from Infinite Earth Stories.